Hello, everybody. Welcome to Zone Defense. Be sure to follow us on Spotify at Zone Defense Podcast, on Twitter at Zone Defense Pod, and subscribe to our YouTube channel at Zone Defense Podcast. And be sure to ring that bell to get post notifications. Also, smash that like button, drop a comment down below, and let us know your thoughts on today's topic. Today, Chris and I are diving into part 4 of our NBA preview, breaking down the Northwest Division. How's it going, Chris?
It's going well, man. We already got through the entire East. Now it's time to get into the Superior Conference with we're going to be covering a lot of good teams. I'm actually really excited to talk about all 5 of these teams. I think all 5 have some interesting pieces going into next year. I mean, the Thunder, I see behind you got a couple Thunder jerseys. Not expecting them to be great this year, but that wasn't last year, so you never know. It's still going to be interesting to talk about them and their potential successful rebuild coming up.
Yeah, I was a big Thunder guy growing up as a kid. So that's why I have a ton of Thunder gear, and I dug it up for the purpose of this episode. But they're definitely the least interesting team, I think, to talk about out of this division. With the other 4 teams, they're definitely not the top of the West. They have the potential to be, and a lot of interest here. A lot of teams that could surprise some people, make some noise, and many of them have done so in recent seasons as well. So, let's dive into the first team here. And it is the team, I would say, if the Miami Heat were the Cinderella story of the bubble, the Denver Nuggets were the second team that could fall into that category, the Cinderella team of the bubble. They had a reasonably good regular season. They finished number 3 in the Western Conference, 46-27 record. But then they overcame back-to-back 3-1 deficits. They overcame the Jazz in the first round, and then they overcame the Clippers. And one of the biggest upsets I think I can remember, in recent memory at least, in terms of NBA, I mean, the Clippers already booked their ticket to the finals, it seemed like, and then the Nuggets came in, overcame a 3-1 deficit, overcame monster deficits in each of those games, and were able to get to the Western Conference Finals. They were really no match for the Lakers in the Western Conference Finals, but nonetheless, it was a very impressive season for them, and they're looking to hopefully build off of that into next season and emerge as a true title contender. But in terms of additions, they added JaMychal Green, they drafted R.J. Hampton and Marcus Howard, as well as added Isaiah Hartenstein. In subtractions, they lost Jeremy Grant, Mason Plumlee, Torrey Craig, 3 key role players for them last year, as well as Keita Bates-Diop and Noah Vonleh. So in terms of 3 keys to watch, Chris, which one do you want to start us off with?
Yeah, I'll just start with number 1 on this one. Is Denver a contender or pretender? I think they're a legitimate contender this year going into the season. I mean, it kind of goes with 3 a little bit, which is a concern going into this year. It's another team that lost some depth going into the season, but I think they did an adequate job replacing it. I mean, this is one of the deepest rosters in the league. They're finally starting to get a little bit of star power. I mean, they had Jokic all the time, but they're starting to get guys like Jamal Murray and even linking it into 2 as well, Michael Porter Jr. as well, which he could blossom into a star. We'll see about that. But Murray really looked good in the bubble. We're going to find out if that was really an illusion or he's the real deal now. I think Murray's a good player. I believe he was on both of our overrated lists back in the summer before the bubble, but then kind of proved us both wrong. I mean, clearly stepped up in the bubble, was their best player by far. We're going to find out if this is really a 1A, 1B, or still just Jokic and then a bunch of depth. And I mean, Murray obviously a solid player, but we'll find out if he's really a superstar. But I mean, losing Jeremy Grant, going to the Pistons, Mason Plumlee, I mean, apparently this is like a situation with the Lions. They're taking the Patriots. We're taking all the Nuggets players. I mean, it's tough losses for sure. But I really like the R.J. Hampton pick. I think he's a similar pick to Michael Porter Jr., a guy that I think has a lot of upside from risk there, but definitely a lot of upside. They also have guys like Gary Harris coming back. He was banged up a lot last year. I think he's going to be back and healthy. I know he played some in the bubble, but I think he's going to get a little healthier here, going to be better. P.J. Dozier showed some flashes in the bubble as well. I like him as well. Monty Morris, of course, a backup point guard, a good player. And then Will Barton, another player coming back as well. So, they still have plenty of depth on this roster. It's just going to be, a guy like Marcus Howard could step up. JaMychal Green has played some minutes for various NBA teams as well. I think they have enough depth as well, and I think they are contenders still.
Yeah, and the funny thing with JaMychal Green is I believe because he was on the Clippers last year and he came, they obviously lost to the Nuggets, and then he came out after he signed with the Nuggets in free agency saying that he was when he was playing against them in the playoffs, he realized, man, they're having a lot of fun out there. I kind of like this team, and then he just decided, hey, I'm going to sign with them. So that's kind of cool, and it gives some props to the Nuggets culture and their. Because I think he mentioned that they just work really hard, they play with some grit, they have a lot of skill players, a lot of depth, and Green wanted to be a part of that. So that's kudos there to the Nuggets and the culture they've established there. But I think you hit the nail right on the head there by saying it really revolves around Jamal Murray and Michael Porter Jr. I mean, Nikola Jokic, he's emerged the last few seasons as a clear number one option, one of the best centers, if not the best center in the entire NBA. He tends to get off to a slow start, so it'll be interesting to see how quickly he can get going here in this shortened season. However, he's still a bona fide star, and it really comes down to, as you said, Murray and Porter Jr. Jamal Murray, he was on my overrated list as well, headed into the bubble. If he can be that guy that was averaging, 30, 40 points a game in the bubble in the regular season, the Nuggets, I mean, he could be an all-star, no doubt about it, and he could be one of the best point guards in the league, and the Nuggets will emerge as, I think, a true competitor to the Lakers. And Michael Porter Jr. evolves as well. He's really good offensively, and I like the attitude. He's got huge amount of confidence, but yeah, you mentioned it right there. Defensively, he's a complete zero. He's a pretty good rebounder, though, surprisingly, just defensively. And I did feel like he improved at least a little bit as the bubble progressed. But that's his big thing. If he can stay healthy, because injuries are still a concern with him, and he can play better on defense, I think he can play really well. And they lost some depth. I think Jeremy Grant and Mason Plumlee and Torrey Craig, they meant a lot to the Nuggets team, and I think those are big losses for them. However, they added JaMychal Green, and then you mentioned it there. Gary Harris is back. They still got Paul Millsap. They got Monte Morris. Bull, maybe he gets some run. Will Barton's back from injury. Seems like Will Barton's a little unhappy for coming off the bench, but hopefully they can get that figured out, and he can be because he's a solid player and offers them some depth. So, I mean, that's a lot of those things need to happen, though, for me to view them as a true contender. Because if Murray falls back to the guy we saw last year during the regular season, if Porter Jr. is injured, can't play defensively, and it's really just Jokic and a bunch of guys, as you said earlier, I don't really see this team as a true contender. But they definitely have the upside, and it's definitely there. And I think they are the bet outside of the Lakers, and we'll talk about the Clippers here in a later episode. I think the Lakers are in a league of their own, and I think of the rest of those teams, I think the Nuggets are the best of those teams, in my opinion, at least.
Yeah, I mean, they're definitely. I would like, I kind of want to get into the rest of the previews as well before I really pronounce them as the third best team. But as of right now, I would say I would probably have them around a 3 to 5 seed. I think they maybe have the upside for the 2 as well. Definitely not the 1, unless barring a ton of injuries to both the Clippers and the Lakers. But I think they're firmly in the 3 spot again. I know they did beat the Clippers last year. I think that was more of a mirage and part of the bubble than really them being the better team. I think just the Clippers, like you said, booked their ticket to the final or the conference finals without actually getting there. And I mean, they really just didn't look that good in the bubble in general. We'll talk about them later, of course, but it really is. I mean, the Nuggets, they're right there on the brink of being an NBA Finals, potential even NBA Finals champion. They're right there, but they're one missing piece away. They might have it on the roster right now. I mean, guys like Michael Porter Jr. and Jamal Murray, if one of them really steps into a star role this year, I think this team could legitimately win the entire NBA Finals if one of them really steps up this year.
Yeah, and each of them will always have the talent, especially with a guy like Jamal Murray, who's been in the league for a few years now. They've always had the talent. It's just the consistency. And I believe you and I said just as much when we said Jamal Murray was overrated back on our episode pre-bubble. So if he can bring the consistency in the regular season, be an all-star, I think the sky's the limit. And honestly, I think as constructed right now, I like this team a little more than the Clippers. We'll talk about the Clippers more later, but they have a lot of chemistry issues, and I don't really know if they did enough to fix those issues, and I'm still a little bit concerned about them. When push comes to shove, I'd probably say the Clippers are the number 2 team, Nuggets are number 3. But I can definitely see a world where the Nuggets are the number 2 seed ahead of the Clippers. But I think the Lakers are definitely in a league of their own for sure. But we already kind of talked about number 3, how a loss of depth affect the Nuggets. We already kind of briefly talked about that. So before we move on to the next team, I just want to ask you the question: do you think Porter Jr. will blossom into a star this season?
I think it's going to take him 1 year. I think he's going to show improvement. I mean, he obviously showed massive flashes last year. I mean, he can really fill it up from beyond the arc. He's a great scorer, really smooth on the offensive side of the ball. But I really think it's going to take more of an effort on the defensive side from him. I mean, I can never classify him into a true star. He's not good enough offensively, like a James Harden, where he can just not play defense. So I mean, that's where he is right now. He really just, I mean, they basically couldn't play him in the playoffs, or at least in that last series against the Lakers, because he just wasn't playing defense. His minutes were really down. Just he was awful defensively. But I think he'll make some strides both offensively and defensively this year. I think it's going to take 1 more year until we really classify him into like a true star. But I think he's going to be a very important member of the team.
Yeah, I agree. I think going into next season, so I think 21, 22, I think he could be a star in that season. But this year, I think he definitely could blossom into a solid number 3 option if he can improve his defense at least a little bit. And he's still got some room to grow offensively as well, but he's already a pretty good offensive player. It's really just on the defensive end. If he improves that, I think he can be a really, really nice player. He's not West, as you mentioned at the top. The West has so many great teams, so many great players, by far better than the Eastern Conference for sure. So Porter Jr. is probably not going to make an all-star team this year, but I could see him being in the conversation at least this year, if he can be that legitimate number 3 star for the Nuggets and help them have a really good record and maybe even make a finals run. But who knows? I like this team. I like this team.
Yeah, I definitely do too as well. But I think we can move on to our next team now. Nuggets, very exciting team. There's definitely some other teams going into, including the Oklahoma City Thunder. I'll just jump into it right now. I mean, you look at it, this was another team that I was very surprised that was like at least a pretty good team last year, man. I really just didn't expect them to be anything special. I mean, they were able to get into the playoffs. Unfortunately, didn't last very long in there. Weren't able to make it out of the first round. But a team with, I mean, they lost a lot. They were able to make some veteran additions here and a ton of draft picks, which you just say additions, draft picks, because they got a ton of them and continue to stockpile on them. This team is going to be legit at some point, and it's really just it's going to be super interesting to see how it goes. But additions, I mean, you look at, like I said, some veteran players here: Trevor Ariza, Al Horford, George Hill, T.J. Leaf, Ty Jerome, and Alexei Pokajevsky. I don't know how to say his name, but the rookie there as well.
It's Pokashevsky, but you basically got it.
There we go. Yeah, I'm really smart. See that? Subtractions. I mean, yeah, this is the clear, maybe the most important subtractions of any team. I mean, Chris Paul, Dennis Schroeder, Steven Adams, Dalino Gallinari, Nerlens Noel, and Terrence Ferguson. I mean, 4 players straight up basically in their starting rotation, if you consider Schroeder as well as a starter. That's probably 4 of their 5 best players right there, man. That is, it's really just insane that they lost so much. But I mean, this is a team that's super committed to a rebuild. Obviously, with the coaching change and everything, it's just going to be really interesting to see what they can do this year. Probably not much, but we will see. I guess it's kind of jumps into the number 1 point, the race to the number 1 pick in 2021. I mean, it's pretty easy just looking at that. It's pretty easy to see how we both feel about this team. I mean, they're not going to be very good. I do think they are interesting, because we'll get into our point number 2 right after that. But I do think they're going to be horrible this year. I mean, they got all these veteran players. I don't think they're going to be super good. All these players are kind of just wash players, taking on expiring contracts, building for the future. I really think that's what the Oklahoma City Thunder are about this year. How do you feel about this team?
Yeah, I mean, I think they're easily the worst team in the Western Conference. I mean, you can make a case 1 through 14. All those teams are vying for the playoffs. Now, if that's logical or not, that's up for debate. But those teams made some moves in the offseason, have some players on their roster with hopes of making a playoff run. And the Thunder are literally the only Western Conference team that is not in that boat, right? They are racing for the number 1 pick. They do have some competition in the Eastern Conference, as we mentioned in earlier episodes with the Cavs and the Knicks. I think those 2 teams are right there with the Thunder, if not a little bit worse than the Thunder. However, the Thunder are by far the worst team in the West, and I think with how good the West is, even if on paper they're better than the Cavs and the Knicks, I think the Cavs and Knicks could get some wins against some of the lower Eastern Conference competition, where the Thunder, they're going to be playing pretty good teams, lots of talent night in and night out. They're going to accumulate a bunch of losses. And this is my pick, I guess, for the number 1 overall pick in 2021. I expect to see Cade Cunningham go from Oklahoma State to Oklahoma City. He'd be a really nice piece there alongside Shai Gilgeous-Alexander. That's a really nice backcourt. But they also have so many picks that they could get a ton of guys next year as well. But yeah, this for me, hands down, is easy. As the Lakers are hands down the best team in the West, and the Thunder are hands down the worst team in the West, and everything else is just a jumbled up mess in my opinion. So, but yeah, I don't know. Do you have anything else you want to add to that?
Yeah, I mean, on paper looks like this will be probably the worst team in the West as well. I tend to agree with that. But I mean, last year I didn't think they were going to be any good either. They were able to pull some magic out. Maybe they make some kind of move or something like that for a big time player. Maybe somebody, I'm not sure. And they ended up getting into playoff contention. Yeah, I expect this to be one of the worst teams in the league, not just the West. I think they're in that group. They're a little bit more interesting than like the Cavaliers and the Knicks, because they do have SGA and Shai Gilgeous-Alexander. He's a combo guard, a great player, a guy that I really like, one of my favorite players in the league. I think he is right on the verge of being a star. Not quite there yet, but now that without the shadow of Chris Paul being there, kind of mentoring him and Dennis Schroeder taking up a lot of minutes as well, I think Shai can try to turn into the alpha dog this year. I think he can really step into that role and score about 25 a game, because, you know, somebody's got to score the ball for this team this year. And I think he can be the guy to absolutely step up for them. And I think he's a great player all around. I think he needs to improve a little bit defensively, but offensively, super controlled, super smooth, tends to coast a little bit in games, but I think that may have been a product of more Chris Paul being there than him actually just being a guy that just isn't. I mean, you could look at it in the bubble, in the playoffs. He seemed kind of in that series like he was just kind of there. I think maybe more into his own this year and really steps up into a role of the star and a guy they can definitely build around for the future.
That's what I was going to say. Is I was all in on Shai, and I'm still, for the most part, all in on Shai. During the regular season, I thought he looked really, really good. He was behind guys offensively in terms of Schroeder and Paul. But then the playoffs, I mean, he was just coasting through games. He was non-existent there for long stretches. He just looked overwhelmed and extremely fazed by the moment of the playoffs. And that was a bit of concern for me. But he's still super young. He's only 22 years old. He's entering his third season in the NBA, and with the moves they made, getting rid of pretty much all of their notable players, including Nerlens Noel. I mean, Nerlens Noel was a solid player for them last year. Yeah. They lost a ton of guys, and I mean, they added Al Horford, they added George Hill, they added Trevor Ariza. Those guys are solid players. Would not surprise me if they get traded at some point during the season as well, though. And they're basically just giving the reins to Shai and seeing what they got here. And I think they got a really good player. I think he could be an all-star just because, as you mentioned, I mean, it reminds me of something like last year with Zach LaVine, how someone had to score the ball for the Bulls, and Zach LaVine was getting some all-star buzz, almost made the team. I can see the same thing happening with SGA this year. As you said, someone's got to score, and I think he's going to put up some monster stats. I think he's got the talent, and I think this is to answer the number 2 key to watch. I think, yes, he is a franchise cornerstone, and you do bring up a good point, as we were all saying the same thing about the Thunder at this time last year. Well, this time last year, the season was already started, but before heading into last season, we all thought the Thunder were going to be one of the worst teams in the league, and then they were actually one of the best teams in the league. So that could happen again, because Al Horford's not an awful player. George Hill's isn't an awful player. However, I think it is way more likely, because they got rid of everybody else, including Chris Paul, that they are a bad team. And I think that'll give Shai plenty of time to make mistakes. He's going to have all the reins, and it's going to really help them out for this year as well as next year when, as I said, I anticipate them being a brutal team. So they'll get a high pick, and then they can build around Shai as well as their other guys. So, and the last thing we have is, this is mainly because it wasn't a whole lot more to talk about, is just how many more picks can Presti acquire. I think I think Al Horford is a solid player in the right system. He was really good for Boston. Philadelphia just wasn't a good fit for him. I think a team would want his leadership, his veteran presence, that he gets the picks for him. Same thing with George Hill, was really good for the Bucks last year. in the playoffs. Is a really solid sixth man type of guy. They could get something for him. Same thing with Trevor Ariza. And then they just got a ton of young guys, just taking some flyers. We didn't even mention Lugens Dort, one of the Cinderella stories of the bubble last year. I think he's a solid player. They got Ty Jerome. He was good in college. Justin Jackson, good in college. Hamidou Diallo. They got these other young guys. They'll probably get a lot of run, and they can see Pokashevsky, the rookie. They can see what they have there. But in terms of how many more picks they can acquire, I think Presti can get at least 3 more with Ariza, Horford, and Hill. I think those 3 guys, they could get some solid return around the trade deadline, assuming all goes according to plan here and the Thunder are a bad team. But what do you think?
Yeah, I mean, obviously, clearly he proved that he can get a ton of picks because he's going to continue to do so. I mean, I'm not saying Ariza, Horford, and George Hill are getting them top 5 picks, but they definitely could get them second rounders, maybe even a late first potentially if one of them plays well this year. But I think it could definitely. I mean, that's all they really need to do now is just get more picks, continue to base. I mean, it's kind of a tank, but kind of just a natural rebuild almost, just because they weren't really. They were okay last year. They weren't super competitive. They weren't like a team that could really compete with the elite teams in the league.
Yeah,
it was probably time for a rebuild. And like we were addressing with number 2, Shea is a perfect guy to build around. He's a super young player, ton of talent, can really score the ball, great playmaker as well, a guy you can build around for the future. And that's what I think the Thunder are going to be about this year.
And it really benefits Presti and this team is that they're one of the, like I said, they're one of only 3 teams that are really trying to be bad, it seems like. And next year is going to be a really good draft. I mean, everything I've heard, I haven't done a bunch of draft research yet, but everything I've heard says that there are 7 legit guys that probably would have went number 1 overall in this year's draft. So the fact the Thunder are most likely going to get a top 3, top 5 at worst pick is really great for their future outlook. But so yeah, I think you said it great there at the top. Is that this is a team that's not going to be great, but they're going to be entertaining, especially with a guy like Shea Gilgeous-Alexander leading the group. But move on to our next team here in the Utah Jazz. So they blew a 3-1 lead to the Denver Nuggets last year in the playoffs. In the regular season, they finished 6th in the West at 44-28. So a pretty solid year all in all. There was, of course, the controversy surrounding Rudy Gobert, who was not careful in regards to COVID-19 protocols, and then was either rightfully or wrongfully accused as being the guy that shut down the sports world. So you believe that, okay. If you don't believe that, that's your choice. But he wasn't. He returned to the bubble, seemed like he had a new attitude. There were some concerns whether Mitchell or Gobert like each other, but then Gobert just signed his massive extension, I think yesterday or 2 days ago, to stay in Utah long term. So it seems like they were able to mend it. And they did look really good in the bubble, and then they just fell apart there in games 5, 6, and 7, blowing the lead to the Nuggets and having another first-round exit. So this is a team that's kind of in limbo a little bit. And they didn't really do a whole lot in terms of free agency in the draft. They added Derek Favors. They brought him back after a year in New Orleans. And then they drafted Udoka Azubuike. Hopefully I said that right. And then they lost Tony Bradley, Ed Davis, and Emmanuel Mudiay. So just some bench guys, not terrible players, but not great players either. But the 3 keys to watch right there at the top. How will the lack of moves affect Utah? What do you think, Chris?
I mean, obviously it's definitely kind of like the Pacers. Maybe this is a better team than the Pacers for sure. I mean, any team in the West that's in the playoffs is going to be better than the Pacers. It's not that great of a team compared to the West. But I think the lack of moves is definitely going to affect them because there is plenty of teams, and we're going to talk about a couple even in this division that I'm more excited about than the Utah Jazz. I think this will still be a playoff team, which I mean I'm kind of getting in number 3, but I really do think the lack of moves they made, just not really any big impact players they brought. I mean, Derek Favors, he's going to step into a depth role on the bench as a 4-5 combo guy, and Azubuike, I do like him a decent amount as a rookie, but he's not someone that's going to be a huge difference maker for them year one. I think he's more of a project player. I mean, obviously Donovan Mitchell, it's a big deal having a guy like him, and having Mike Conley. I mean, he was banged up for most of the year. I know he played some in the bubble, but I mean, he was getting better and better. He actually did look pretty good. I thought he had definitely had a few games where he was just kind of splashing from 3, and they needed a guy like that for sure. Having him back and having Bojan Bogdanovic come back as well, because he was also not in the bubble, I think that's going to be good for them. I mean, Bogdanovic, another guy that can kind of take some pressure off Donovan Mitchell and can score the ball at about 20 points per game clip. Him and Conley will give you 15 as well. So, I mean, those two paired with Mitchell, Joe Ingles, and Gobert. I mean, it's a very solid starting lineup, but I am a little bit worried about their depth. I don't think they have a lot of talent. I know they have Jordan Clarkson, a guy that can fill up on the bench, but I mean, a guy like Moutier, guys like Ed Davis, Tony Bradley, guys that were coming off the bench. It's going to be interesting to see who can replace them. And I really just don't know if they have the full star power to really be a competitor this year. I think they will make the playoffs. I do think that there's definitely a chance that they don't, though, and that's concerning for them and a team that definitely is looking to compete right now with the core that they have currently.
Yeah, I agree. I think in terms of their bench, it's not great. It's not like the worst in the league. I mean, they got guys like Jordan Clarkson, Derek Favors, Jorgis Niang is not a terrible player. Royce O'Neal isn't awful, but it's not great. And some of those guys will probably find their way in the starting lineup often, most nights as well. I think the big additions for them will be the two additions they made last year in Bogdanovic and Conley. Is Bogdanovic actually had a pretty good year last year in the regular season, but then got hurt and wasn't able to play in the bubble. But then with Mike Conley, he just did not look like himself for the entire season last year. But I agree. I thought he looked a little bit better in the bubble. It seemed like he was finding his groove a little bit. If they can get even – I mean, Mike Conley would have been an all-star if he was in the Eastern Conference. That's how good of a player he was. If they can get even 85 to 90% of that guy plus a healthy Bogdanovic, I think this could be a really nice team. Top 5 team in the West easily. However, if Conley continues to struggle, if Bogdanovic gets hurt again, if Clarkson's he was really solid off the bench last year, if that was more of an aberration and he's not as good this year off the bench, that's definitely concerning because then you just have a team with Rudy Gobert, Donovan Mitchell. I know everyone loves Joe Ingles. I'm not a huge Joe Ingles guy, but you just have Mitchell and Gobert, not a lot going there, and I definitely could see a world where they don't make the playoffs. But I have liked what I've seen from Bogdanovic and Conley, and I tend to side with you on the argument in saying that they're most likely going to make the playoffs and even be a top 6 team in the West and not even have to worry about the play-in tournament as the 7th or 8th seed. But I kind of teased it there with talking about Donovan Mitchell. Do you think he can reach another level? Because if he can reach another level, then I think even if Conley or Bogdanovic, even one of those guys or both of those guys, even if they struggle, I think if Mitchell can become a true super duper star, it won't even matter. The Jazz will still be a good team. But what do you think?
I think Donovan Mitchell absolutely can take another step in his game. I mean, offensively, you could even see in the bubble, he was absolutely unstoppable. And it could have been a little bit of a product of not having guys like Bogdanovic there and having Conley coming back from the injury as well. Definitely could be that. But he really just looked dominant in the playoffs. I think that 3-1 lead, blowing that was more of a product of Jamal Murray just being better than everyone else on the floor than really them actually choking. I mean, Murray was just absolutely dynamic in pretty much every game in that series, absolutely carried them in multiple games. Donovan Mitchell was just there balling out the entire series. Definitely not on him. That's why they lost, because he was incredible. He gave everything he had. But I do think he can take another level. He plays, like you said, even 90% of what he was in the bubble, I think, is honestly another level for him, because that bubble he looked like a top 5 player in the league in the bubble, man. He was awesome. But it was a short stay. Could have just been a mirage, a few games where he got hot. I'm very excited. I do like Donovan Mitchell a lot. I think he's one of the better. I don't think he's overrated. Some people do think he's overrated, but I think he's really taking minor strides whether they're minor strides every year or major strides. And he's getting better as each year goes by. I think he improves little parts of his game. Offensively, he's been more efficient the last couple of years, not taking as many bad shots. He's a decent defender as well. I think he's a very good player, and he's definitely a star right now and can reach the superstar level, in my opinion. I think he's got the talent to do it.
I agree. I could see Mitchell being a guy like Damian Lillard, who I know you're a big Lillard guy, but he's not. I wouldn't put him on the level of like a Luka or a Giannis or a LeBron, but he's still one of the top 10 players in the league, and I could see Mitchell being in that conversation. He's really just got to improve a little bit defensively. He's not terrible defensively, but he's got to improve a little bit there on that end of the floor. But I agree with you. Offensively, he looked really, really good in the bubble. And I think there is another level he can reach. I mean, it seems like he's been in the league for longer than he really has. I think this is entering his 4th season in the league. And I don't think he will let the Jazz, even with the lack of moves that they've made, and it doesn't seem like they're going to be a super entertaining team to watch. I don't think he'll let them miss the playoffs. I think he's got a lot of dog in him, and he's a really good alpha dog kind of player, and will help them make the playoffs. But we already really talked about the final key is Utah in danger of missing the playoffs in the loaded West. It seems like we're both in agreement that, yeah, it's possible. You can see a world where this happens, but they're definitely not going to be the most entertaining team to watch. I think there's going to be several teams who are maybe worse than them record-wise that are way more entertaining to watch. But Utah, with Gobert, they're going to have a really good defense. Not, like I said, not going to be a great team to watch, but they're going to grind out some victories. I think I put it at like a 70%, 70% chance they're a top 6 team in the West, make the playoffs, 30% chance they either miss the playoffs completely, which I would be shocked by, or maybe lose in the play-in tournament as a 7 or 8 seed. But do you agree with that, or what do you think?
Yeah, I think it's more likely that they do end up making the playoffs, like I said earlier. But I think there's obviously, like we said, a chance they end up not getting in because, the West even more improved this year. I mean, it just continues to get more lopsided and more lopsided every year. The West is just absolutely loaded. But I really do think it's a lot more likely for them to actually make the playoffs. I think, like you said, Donovan Mitchell, it's going to be really hard. I mean, I think he would almost have to go down with an injury or something, or another star player in there, like a guy like Gobert, a guy like Bogdanovich again. I think one of them would have to go down for sure for them to absolutely miss the playoffs, and even then, they still might make it as long as it isn't Donovan Mitchell. But I think, like we said, I really don't think they're a legit contender this year. I think they're going to be a playoff. Probably their ceiling is probably winning one playoff series, and even that might be generous because they're probably going to be taking on a team like the Nuggets, a team like the Clippers or the Lakers, maybe even if they aren't as good as we think. I think it's going to be. I don't really know what the Jazz should do now. I really don't. It's tough because they have a good core. They have a good core, a group of guys to build around, but I don't know if it's enough. I really don't. Unfortunately, if they were in the East, this would probably be a top 4, top 5 seed, but it's not the same in the West, man.
Yeah, I mean, they have a star in Mitchell. They have one of, if not the best defensive center in the league in Gobert. I know a lot of people give him crap because he's not as great offensively, but he is so good defensively. Such a great rebounder. And offensively, he's a really nice lob threat, really good at getting offensive rebounds, putting them back up, really good interior offensively. Obviously, he doesn't have the great perimeter game, but they got 2 really good guys there, and then they have a bunch of other guys that if they pan out, if a Conley or Bogdanovich is good, Jazz will be good. If not, they might, like you said, they might have to really look at themselves in the mirror here and say, where do we go? Where do we go from here? We got 2 really nice pieces, but what can we do to build around them? But yeah, so they're not going to be a super entertaining team because of the style of play, but it'll be interesting to see if they're good this year, and if they're not good this year, where they go from there. So. Still some intriguing storylines with the Jazz, but move on now to your second favorite team, the Portland Trail Blazers. So it's only right if you introduce the Blazers to the audience.
Oh yeah, baby. I mean, Portland Trail Blazers last year, I mean, was not their best year. I mean, obviously Damian Lillard was awesome, like he always is. He's one of the better players in the league. My favorite player, and honestly my favorite athlete in general. I think he's just incredible, and he's really fun to watch. But a team that unfortunately finished under the 500 mark last year. They really weren't that good last season at 35-39, but they were able to sneak in. They caught fire in the play-in tournament, and that's why they were able to sneak into the 18. Actually made it interesting against the Lakers for a little while. Dame went down with he had a couple injuries throughout the series. Don't really think it would have mattered that much. I think it was just Game 1, it was awesome to see them take down the Lakers because I don't like the Lakers either. But after that, it was just too much going up against a guy like LeBron, a guy like AD. But a team that I think is actually really interesting this year. I think they actually have a chance to be good. Could be a little bit of a homerage because I do like them. But I actually think they have a chance to be legitimately pretty good this year, and potentially even better than the Jazz, in my opinion. It could be a bold take, but I really they have the best player on the 2 teams, and they really added a lot this offseason. Robert Covington, big move. I think that's actually a really nice move. This is a team that really just doesn't have any defense. Couldn't play defense last year. A team that can score at will, but really struggled defensively, and I think Covington's really going to help out with that. Bringing back Enes Kanter. He was back. He was on the team a couple years ago. Good depth piece for sure for them. And then Derrick Jones Jr. and Harry Giles, a couple guys that are still on the younger side, could make an impact this year, but we'll have to see about that. And I really don't think they lost a whole lot. I mean, Trevor Ariza was just kind of whatever for them. Whiteside, obviously, he made an impact, but they have Nurkic back now. I don't think they really need him anymore. And then Mario Hezonja, Caleb Swanigan, just a couple of young guys that just aren't really big-time impact players. But, yeah, like we have on our first key to watch here, several players returning from injury. Yeah, I mean, you have Damian forefront. I mean, he got hurt right in the bubble. He's going to be 100% going into this year, at least as of what I've heard. I'm sure he's going to be just as good as he was last year. He's an absolute grip. I mean, you could see him in the bubble. He had to carry them for them to win games. And I mean, I think the recipe's pretty similar. I mean, if Dame's good, they're going to be good. If he's not, it probably won't go that well. But I think pretty similar for them. But having Nurkic come back as well, having guys like they also have Rodney Hood coming back from injury. I think that's a key piece as well, coming off the bench, a guy that can really fill it up from three, kind of a similar to Jordan Clarkson type player, a guy that for the Jazz can fill it up at any time, can kind of replace the starters. But I really do think this team can actually be legitimately good. I don't know how you feel about that. I'll get your opinion now because I didn't stop being a homer for a second. But what do you think about the Trailblazers? What are they really this season?
No, I agree. I think they're probably, if I had to pick right now, I probably say they're my 4 or 5 seed in the West. Yeah. And I think I have a lot more confidence in them than I do a team like Utah. I think their ceiling is much higher because they have Damian Lillard, they have CJ McCollum, but then they got, as you already mentioned, they got tons of guys come back from injuries. Zach Collins, Yusuf Nurkic, most notably, Rodney Hood. I mean, Rodney Hood was really good for them 2 years ago. I think a lot of people forgot about that because he was hurt. But then on top of that, they got Anthony Simons, not a terrible player. Gary Trent Jr. is really good, I think. Carmelo Anthony brings some veteran leadership to them. And still, I know he's old. He's 36 years old already, but he's still a solid player. Robert Covington, I think he's a really nice player, was really good there for the Rockets. I saw some people saying he might have been better than James Harden and Russell Westbrook in the bubble. I wouldn't go that far, but I thought he looked really, really good.
Yeah, he did.
And I think he's a really nice addition for them. Nasir Little, I mean, Enes Kanter too. He was really good for Portland a couple years ago. They brought him back. Derek Jones Jr. was solid last year for the Heat. They just got a lot of solid players. They have a really superstar level guy in Damian Lillard, one of the top 10 players in the league. And yeah, I mean, I don't think you're being a homer. I've heard a lot of people in the national media talk about look out for these Blazers. If they can stay healthy, I mean, that's a big if, right? They have a lot of guys who are injury prone. If they can stay healthy, I think this is no doubt about it, a top 5 team in the West. It could maybe even, I mean, they made it to the Western Conference Finals 2 years ago. I could see that happening again this year if things bounce right for them. But there's definitely the upside there for sure.
I mean, yeah, this team, I mean, the West maybe has improved a little bit even since their run to the conference finals, but I also think they've improved since then. I mean, adding a guy like Covington, I mean, he's a great 3-and-D player, can shoot the 3-ball well, and is easily comes in and is their best defender. It's not even close. This team still will probably struggle a little bit defensively, but even adding a guy like, I mean, Covington is one of the better wing defenders in the league. He's a solid, scrappy defender and a guy that they absolutely needed some. I mean, I think trading a first rounder, I mean, it's a lot to give up. But I think it is definitely worth it for a guy like Covington when they really need a guy that can get some stops on defense. I mean, and then like I was saying, they definitely improved since then because even Lillard has gotten even better since that run. I mean, the guy's been absolutely carrying them. I mean, he had to carry. They went 35 and 39 last year, and he was the reason they won probably 27 of those games, and including the one playoff game as well. I mean, he's just absolutely dynamic. And then having Nurkic, I thought he showed flashes last year for sure when he came back, but it definitely took some time. You could tell he was rusty. Defensively, a little bit slow. Was good offensively, but showed some inconsistencies as well. I mean, this is a team that I followed, so I have a little more insight on this watching him play. There was times where he really looked like the old Nurkic, times that he didn't. But I think this year, a year off the injury, I think he's going to be back to full health. I think it's going to be perfect to pair him with McCollum and Lillard. It's basically the same core. Just I think they got a little bit better, and like we were saying, Rodney Hood is going to be an impact player. I think that's really a big addition. I think even bringing back Melo for another affordable contract off the bench, I mean, he could fill it up as well. I think this whole team is going to be able to score the ball. It's just whether or not they can play defense.
Yeah, I don't have a whole lot to add there because I think as long as they stay healthy and improve a little bit defensively, I think they could be a top 5 team in the West. However, to propel themselves into the true contention with the Lakers, do you think they're going to make another move? Because I think I could definitely see a world where they get off a guy like CJ McCollum. If they get off to a little slower of a start, if he gets off to a slower of a start, and they're like, you know what, we just got to shake things up here. It's this CJ Dame combo isn't working. Maybe they trade CJ. I've seen Zach Collins' name float around in some rumors. CJ, Collins, a couple picks. Maybe they go after a guy, maybe a James Harden, who knows? Maybe a guy like Victor Oladipo, like we talked about in earlier episodes. But what do you think? Do you think they need to make a move, or do you think this team, as long as they stay healthy as it's currently constructed, could maybe make a run at the finals?
Yeah, I think they're a dark horse potential finals contender, or at least conference finals contender. I think as of right now. Yeah, if they make another move, it could definitely shake things up. I do like you bringing up. I mean, if they can get him without giving up McCollum, because I don't think that would be. I think I'd rather keep McCollum, but getting a guy like Victor Oladipo would be an interesting move for this team for sure.
Yeah.
Another player that they need defense. So I mean, that'd be a really interesting piece to get alongside Dame. I mean, even if they do have to get McCollum, maybe they get a pick or something as well in return. I think that's a pretty good deal for them. Getting Harden, I mean, that's probably more of a pipe dream. I haven't really seen them getting rumored in that, but I mean, it's possible, I guess, they give up McCollum, Collins, maybe some picks as well. I think it could be a possibility. But I mean, for what they are and what we think I think I really do think that their floor is pretty high this year, as long as they don't have injuries. I mean, you could say that about any team. I mean, if LeBron goes down with an injury, I don't think the Lakers have a very high floor either. It's the same thing with Dame. If Dame goes out, this team isn't going to be very good. But barring any major injuries, I think this team can legitimately compete for a 4 or 5 seed. And I mean, getting there in the play, I mean, they can easily beat those teams around. I mean, if the Jazz are the 5 seed, I think they're the better team of those two. If they get a first round matchup against them, they can definitely win and then upset some good teams going and getting to the conference finals, maybe even making an NBA finals run. It just depends. That would depend on how hot Dame is at the time. And he goes on those 2-week stretches where he's the best player in the NBA. I would even argue. And I mean, if he has one of those in the playoffs, this team could legitimately win multiple series and get all the way to the finals.
Yeah, and they were the 8th seed last year, as you said. But looking at some of the teams that were above them, and the Rockets, the Thunder, and the Jazz, I think they got better than all 3 of those teams in the offseason. So as long as they stay healthy, I think they could easily propel themselves into a 4 or 5 seed. And most likely win a playoff series, and maybe even win 2 playoff series, or at least put a heck of a fight against a Clippers or a Nuggets or a Lakers in the second round. But this is a team much like the Sixers or the Nets, like we talked about in previous episodes, or even the Pistons for that matter, where I wasn't super high on them at first, and then once I started to do some more research, learn more about what they did, I like this team more and more. I'm not going to be a diehard Blazers fan like you. I'm not hopping on the bandwagon, but I've always loved Robert Covington. I think he's a really nice addition, a great fit for this team, exactly what they needed, and will really help them hopefully do really well this year. But yeah, definitely interesting team to watch for sure.
Yeah, I'm very excited to watch them this year. I mean, I'll be tuning into most of their games.
So the final team is producer John's favorite team second favorite team in the NBA behind the Detroit Pistons, and it's the Minnesota Timberwolves. So this is a team last year. They were one of the few Western Conference teams to not make the trip to the bubble. It was them and the Golden State Warriors. The Wolves finished 14th in the West at 19-45. I believe they had 2 10-plus losing streaks in the season. I think Karl-Anthony Towns only won one. He was only on the court for 1 win in December and January, and maybe even February. It's some ridiculous stat like that. So this was a team that was not good last year. They showed some flashes, but they weren't good. But they did do a whole lot in terms of off-season moves. Most notably, because they were so bad last year, they were able to get the first overall pick in the draft and take Anthony Edwards out of Georgia. There are some definite concerns because he did sort of straight up say he doesn't like watching basketball. So that might be a bit of a concern with the number 1 overall pick, but definitely has some potential there. They also brought back Ricky Rubio. They got Rondae Hollis-Jefferson and Ed Davis. They didn't really lose a whole lot, just some bench pieces in James Johnson, Omari Spellman, and Evan. First and foremost, we have to start out with the number 1 overall pick, Anthony Edwards. It seems like some people are really high on this kid, that they think he can be really, really good. And other people think that it's a really big concern with his commitment level. And if he was just more so the number 1 overall pick because he was a system fit and because it was a weaker draft class for sure. So Chris, I'll let you start this one off. What are your expectations for Anthony Edwards?
Yeah, Anthony Edwards, was really good in college at Georgia. I mean, this guy could fill it up from anywhere. It's just going to be the concern with him is, like you said, a lack of interest in the actual sport. I don't know. I mean, if he's good at it, I don't know if it really matters. But maybe he might not have the desire to be, have the ceiling of other players. But I think Edwards definitely has the potential of being a really good player. I mean, he's obviously an excellent scorer. I think he's going to come and make an impact right away in the scoring department. But defense has been a slight issue for him throughout his college career. It's more of an effort thing than an actual talent thing, and that's pretty much what defense is anyway. It's just an effort thing. So it's going to be interesting to see if he can pick up his intensity on that side of the ball as well. I saw a couple highlights of him in the preseason making really nice defensive plays, though, shutting down good star NBA players on defense. So, I mean, if he's willing to put in the effort, I think he can absolutely be a good defender as well. I mean, I know everyone's already labeling him as a bust before the season. I don't want to go that far. Give him a couple years to really make a name for himself. I think this was a riskier pick, but this was a draft without really a clear number 1 overall pick. I know you can make an argument for LaMelo Ball, but they already have a point guard in D'Angelo Russell, which I'll get into him after this. And Drew kind of already knows my opinion on him as well. But I do think Anthony Edwards has a high ceiling, but also I would say a lower floor than most number 1 overall picks. But we'll have to see. What do you think about Edwards?
I 100% agree with you, Chris. He could be really good. He also could be really, really bad. He has kind of a very similar Anthony Bennett-like ceiling and floor, where Bennett could have been really good in a different world. But he also was just number 1 overall pick, and at least at the time was a very weak draft without a consensus number 1 guy.
Yeah.
So it can be very similar for Anthony Edwards. Not a great draft. I think, as many experts said, in any other draft, he'd probably be more of a number 7, number 8 overall pick. But that's just how the cards fell for him. But he has a great story. I think a lot of his family members passed away tragically. So maybe that was part of the reason why it seemed like he's much more into much bigger football guy than basketball, but maybe he has a great story, and I wish him the best. I really hope he's a good player, but he has some definite room for improvement there for sure. However, if he does end up being really, really good, he does slide in very nicely with this team and their core of Karl-Anthony Towns and D'Angelo Russell. So I know, Chris, you teased it there, your feelings on D'Angelo Russell, so I will just give you the floor here and say, what do you think about Russell as well as Towns, and can this duo actually win together?
Well, for me, Towns is a very good player. I think it's been more of a product of the Minnesota Timberwolves roster than any problems with him in terms of talent. I think Towns is one of the better big men in the league. Big men in the league, but definitely in my top 3 for big men. I think he's better than Joel Embiid. I think my big 3 would be him, Bam, and Jokic. And then I said Bam was my top center, but you can absolutely make an argument for any of those 3. I think they're all very good. Towns might be the best offensively of the 3 of them. I mean, this dude can fill it up from anywhere. He's a great shooter, really good back to the basket, great post moves, good finisher around the rim. His defense could use some work, but he's not I don't think he's a horrible post defender. He's all right. He could use some work. He's a really good rebounder on both sides of the floor as well. I do really like Karl-Anthony Towns. I think in the right situation, he can, but my question is this the right situation? And I really do question it, because D'Angelo Russell, this team paid the bag pretty much for D'Angelo Russell. Gave away Andrew Wiggins, which in his own right was a bust, and a pick. Got D'Angelo Russell. I really just don't. I think he's overrated. I mean, he was my number 1 on the overrated list when we did the NBA. It was before the summer, before the bubble and everything. But I really do still believe he is the most overrated player in the NBA. I think his impact on the floor is really just. I mean, it's overshadowed. He's not a superstar. He's not even anything close. He's not even a star, in my opinion. He's just I would say an average starting point guard. Even, I mean, this dude can fill it up, but he's super inefficient. He really reminds me of Devontae Graham, but with a lot more hype. I mean, he's inefficient. He can score, but he's really inefficient. He's a good mid-range jump shooter. He's not a great playmaker. He doesn't do anything in transition, which, I mean, I really like point guards that push the tempo of the floor as well. And he's not a guy that does it ever. He's a decent 3-point shooter, not insane, and he's a horribly inefficient defender as well. A guy that really can't stay in front of anybody on the perimeter. It's just, just a guy that I don't really like. I mean, there's some qualities of him are fun to watch, but his all-around game is really overrated in my opinion. And I think that is the pitfall of this team. I don't think this team is making the playoffs this year. I really don't think they're going to be even that much more competitive. I don't think they got a whole lot better this year, but we'll have to see, I guess. That's just my opinion. I don't think this team can live up to any hype that is around them.
I'm a little bit higher on them, and Russell to a lesser extent. I mean, I think Towns is really, really good. He did sign that massive extension just a few seasons ago, and they're going to need to start winning or at least competing for playoff spots here, especially now with the play-in tournament, if they don't want to lose him. Because, I mean, first and foremost, he's going through a lot of off-the-court stuff. I think he lost, 7 or 8 family members to COVID-19, including his mom. So if he doesn't have a great season this year, I mean, that's more than understanding. He's going through a lot of stuff. But outside of Towns, with D'Angelo Russell, he was an all-star just a couple years ago, and yeah, it was the East, but he was a pretty good player there. And I do think, I mean, he can score the lights out of the ball. He just needs to improve a little bit defensively and improve his playmaking skills a little bit. But even in playmaking, I think he's a decent playmaker as well. So I ultimately think that Towns and Russell can win together. And I think they just need a little more help in a guy like an Anthony Edwards or also a Malik Beasley, who I know he got into some trouble with the law here in the offseason, but if he can come back, be motivated, he was a really solid player for them after they traded for him from the Denver Nuggets. He was really good. They also got guys like Jarrett Culver, who had a brutal rookie season. Maybe he lives up to the hype he had. Josh Okogie's a pretty decent player. Ricky Rubio, I think, could be the perfect point guard for this team to be alongside D'Angelo Russell and then have Russell slide into more of a shooting guard type of role, which I think fits his skill set a little bit better than being a true point guard. And then, I mean, that's a solid starting lineup. And I think, as we said throughout this episode, the West is loaded. But I think the Wolves, Towns had some injury issues last season. If he can stay healthy, I think this could be a team that finds their way into the 7, 8, 9, 10 spot and have a spot in the play-in tournament. So in terms of if they can live up to the hype, I'm not sure about that, because the hype around them, if you remember, with Andrew Wiggins and Towns, was so ginormous there for a while. It's hard to see if they'll ever be able to live up to that, especially now that Wiggins isn't even on the team anymore. And I don't think their hype was to get the 7th, 8th, 9th, or 10th seed. However, I think they're going to be better than they were last year, and I definitely think I'm a little more higher on this team than you are.
Yeah, you definitely are a little bit higher than me. I'm really worried about the lack of depth with this team. I know they, like you said, they have Ricky Rubio leading the second unit. Other than that, they really don't have a lot of depth. Malik Beasley, yeah, he's a decent player, but I really think he's more of a rotational guy than anything. I mean, he's going to be in their starting lineup. He's a fine player. I'm not trashing the guy, but like you said, he's got run-ins off the court as well. Who knows if he's going to be out there for the whole season? We'll have to see about that. But Josh Okogie's all right, but other than that, Jared Vanderbilt. I really just don't think their bench is that good. I expect this team to maybe compete for one of those last play-in spots, but other than that, I'm just not that high on them. I think this is in a West, a lot of turmoil, transitions for teams, players. I think it's going to be very interesting to see where they slot in, and I don't think it'll be very high personally. Unless Anthony Edwards is some superstar, if deloading and Cat really mesh, we haven't seen a whole lot of them together yet, then maybe they could sneak into the 8th seed, but I don't see it.
And actually, I was going to say, they have Rondae Hollis-Jefferson too, and he's on the screen there, but they actually released him here before the regular season. So he's not even on the team anymore either, and he's a solid player. He was solid for the Raptors last year, and I was going to say, they got him though. He's a decent bench piece. They don't even have him anymore. So I like Ed Davis as well. I think he's a solid bench player. I don't know. It seems like you have very low expectations. I don't have like high expectations for this team, but I can see them being better than some of the teams in the West. If a few things fall their way, if Anthony Edwards proves to be the real deal, if Towns and Rubio too, to a lesser extent, who's also had some injury issues, if they can both stay healthy, even D'Angelo Russell too, he has some injury issues as well. If he can stay healthy, if they mesh well, I like their starting lineup, and I think that'll be enough to get them into the play-in tournament. However, there is definitely a very real possibility that they fall on their face, as you seem to at least think a little bit more than I do. That'll probably happen. But yeah, do you have anything else to add about the Timberwolves or any other team we talked about?
No, this is like you said. A division that I do like. A lot of these teams are very interesting. It's going to be interesting to see how this shapes out.
Yeah, for sure. Even if even the Thunder or the Timberwolves, even if there aren't great teams, I think they still have a lot of intriguing pieces that'll be worth watching. Absolutely. But that's it for this episode. We're the Zone Defense Podcast. Be sure to subscribe to us on YouTube and follow us on Spotify and Twitter at Zone Defense Pod, and search us on Apple Podcasts. We did the whole Eastern Conference before, so check out those first 3 parts, and we'll do the other 2 Western Conference divisions here very soon for parts 5 and part 6. We also have a ton of NFL content out there, and the playoffs are right around the corner, so we'll be doing a lot of different playoff coverage as well. So be sure to check all that stuff out. And smash that like button, and also drop a comment down below. Let us know your thoughts, and give us your own predictions, what you think we were right about, what you think we were wrong about. We love reading through all of those. But thank you for listening to this episode, and we'll see you next time.
Peace.